metaverse.
Greetings, I'm Shad, and I want to talk about how medieval people entertained themselves, because there's an interesting thing that comes up when I've been discussing this with other people and questions that they had, and it's this, that they think medieval people would have been bored all the time. This really, I feel, comes from a modern mindset because we are spoiled. We are tremendously spoiled for luxury and entertainment, to the point where we sometimes have trouble thinking, what would we do without them? How would we bother entertaining ourselves when our power goes out? What are we going to do? And it's because we're just not used to it. And it's not a good thing, by the way. I think it's far more productive to be able to entertain yourselves, occupy yourselves, do productive things without being so reliant on technology. And I'm saying this like pot calling kettle black, because I play video games all the time, on the computer all the time. And so even I've had that impression. But in studying the past, it's given me an appreciation of, you know, there are a lot of things that you can do that you don't need technology to have a great time. And I want to mention some specific points of reference of things they did in the medieval period to entertain themselves. Because the other misconception that's related to this, it wasn't all just back-breaking labor and they didn't do things for fun. So let's address these misconceptions right now. So the first thing, of course, is that it wasn't actually always back-breaking labor. I've heard varying reports of the average working day of the medieval person, but I think we also need to reassess what was work, because one of the goals, I think, for anyone is to try and find a type of work that you can enjoy and do as part of your daily life. And a lot of the work that people would do in the medieval period were necessities of life, which is actually a bit different than, say, a 9-to-5 job that you don't enjoy at all and hate. When you're doing the same thing over and over again, it's a much likely chance that you're going to end up finding that monotonous and boring and dislike it than multiple daily tasks that you just need to do, you know, on average. And it's not necessarily daily, actually. Sometimes they change, that you might only need to do this one once a week and something else, you know, sporadically here and there, to the point that whenever you wake up, you just have the things that you need to do, which might change based on season, based on necessity. You know, some of the shingles in my roof are a bit loose. I'll need to fix those today, so that's on the list. And yeah, feeding the animals there. I already took care of, weeded the garden or whatever, so the gardening is done, that's been fertilized. But what about preparing our food? And so even though a lot of the tasks might be similar, there's a lot of diversity in switching up based on one's already been done, what's next, to the point that average daily life, I feel, in a medieval context, and look, I'm not saying medieval context is great across the board, because there are things that we don't deal with that they deal with which are horrible, like famine, like plagues, like all those things, okay? Our healthcare is much better, and medicine and other things. But in terms of daily living, there is kind of a wholesomeness I do recognize when I look back about waking up and having the freedom of choosing what you do just for your own support, supporting your family. And there's actually a bit of refreshing variety in those tasks that you get the freedom to pick, which I actually think would have contributed to a more healthy mentality than being stuck in a 9-to-5 job that you don't like and you're just doing monotonously every single day. And so I actually think people would find regular life more enjoyable generally. Not in every aspect, though, because, of course, like, there are luxuries we enjoy that I think they would, you know, thought was just brilliant. I think they would think TV is incredible. How do I know that? Because they enjoyed going to plays, and there are other things that they had lower versions, lower technological versions that could be kind of compared to TV that they liked to enjoy, but they couldn't indulge in so easily as we do in the modern day and get to enjoy it with a much better quality because of modern technology. So in trying to analyze what the average day for the average person is, first of all, we need to understand, as I mentioned, the diversity of tasks, and then we need to understand it also does depend on the profession, because outside of the farmer, who's a homesteader and got all the things that they're doing on their home, there were tradesmen, of course, who were doing the same task far more often, like the tile maker, like the butcher, the tanner, any number of things where you develop a trade and you practice that. The key is then to find a trade you actively enjoy, and then it wouldn't be as monotonous doing it over and over again. But to say that they did it all the time, like sun up to sundown, no, they would have a working day and there would be parts than a day where they wouldn't have to work. There'd be days that they'd have off. Remember, on medieval period, a lot of them were Christians, and what did they say about the Sabbath? It's not to say people never worked on the Sabbath, but if they were taking their Christianity seriously, they would try and avoid working on the Sabbath, use it as a day of rest, and have a day off. What did they do for entertainment then on those days? So in regards to the entertainment, there are certain things that are a bit different in class, all right? If you're rich and a high nobility, we know that they enjoyed things that were more prestigious and harder for the average person to do, like going on hunts, all right? And in certain instances, hunting deer was restricted to nobility because they didn't want them hunted out of it, so they weren't available. But also things like hawking, using a hawk to hunt and stuff. Access to certain sports were more readily available to nobility and stuff. Tennis. Medieval tennis is an interesting one in and of itself. Yes, medieval tennis did exist. Modern day tennis is not the same, but it's the evolution of. And if you want a whole video on medieval tennis, Lindy Page is a great one. But first, let's look at those entertainment things that were mostly available to everyone that they could enjoy regardless of social status. Because this is the thing, if regular commoners enjoyed it, that was an enjoyable thing, why wouldn't nobility enjoy it then either? So we have things like singing. People loved singing in the medieval period where they were sitting at home and they'll take turns in singing. And this is kind of like a lost thing. So much so it seems far more foreign to us than it was. And you don't need to go too far back in the past to find singing as an enjoyable activity that groups of people would do. My father actually had a family band that he was a part of, and singing encompassed a larger portion in his family life. And it was with a bit of regret that none of us kids, except my brother, Jazza, from, Draw Jazza, he has some great singing talent, okay? But the rest of us didn't really embrace it. But he had a long tradition of singing. I remember some of the old songs that he would sing to us as kids and become family songs. And we had a practice in our own family called Family Home Evening. And part of Family Home Evening, which was on Monday nights, is we would all sing songs together. And we would sing some of the songs that he would sing when he was young, like Lemon Tree. There was a song, Lemon Tree. And so it's hard to. I'm sad I've forgotten some of the names of this. Like there was a couple of train ones that my dad really liked. This is literally a lost tradition and practice that was done far more often than you might think not too far ago. And the medieval period, no exception. They actually loved group singing together or taking turns, or if someone had a talented voice, them singing as well. It was a form of entertainment. They enjoyed it. Folk songs would be shared around. They would like hearing new songs. This is where the idea of the traveling troubadour, okay, the bard that we kind of look at now. Yes, singing, entertaining, they liked it. Another thing, poetry. Again, another lost form of entertainment that medieval people loved. I reference and also learnt a bit more about this on my videos about medieval literacy, and when I found out that the commoners had a higher literacy rate than is vastly represented in modern media, where they say no one in the media, the commoners just didn't know how to read, right? Well, no, actually, they a lot more knew how to read than people realize, and one of the things that they loved reading was poetry. You can actually find, there are surviving examples of poetry that was specifically written for commoners to read. And they loved, like poetry, it involved story, but they enjoyed the way the prose was structured, so it was more entertaining, enjoyable to listen to, but also to speaking in verse, speaking in rhyme and everything like that. Poetry was so much bigger in the past than it is now. It's almost a lost art now. And I'm a bit, because I never got into poetry and it's hard for me to enjoy poetry, but I can understand why people have enjoyed it, do enjoy it. And in the past, poetry was big. And you could actually get to the point, because poetry was so in demand and people enjoyed it so much, you could become famous as a famous poet, not as a... Writing was also associated, because if you were good at poetry, you were usually good at writing, and then you would write your poems and everything, and you could get famous and support yourself just as a famous poet. And there were famous poets in the past as well. Funny, I learnt about one because there was this English poet who wrote a poem, and there was an artistic depiction with him shooting a bow. And this was one of the references I was using about that evidence that people shot with a bow and arrow on the outside of the bow, which is the right side, or over the thumb is another term for it. And I learnt about this medieval poet that was famous in the time, and several of his collections were rewritten by monks and things like that. So anyway, poetry. They loved it. And if you're wanting to adapt the medieval period, or even depict it, if you're depicting the medieval period, or if you're adapting it into fantasy and you want it more authentically, these are the things that, like, think about singing, think about poems. They would be shared a lot. The other one is storytelling. They would share stories, and sometimes it was in poems, sometimes not. But the way the stories are told, okay, there is this practice. It's funny how some of these traditions remained for a long time and have only more recently gone out of practice. So I have sisters, and of course I was exposed to some more stereotypically female-enjoyed medias, one of them being Anne of Green Gables. There's a part in, so Anne of Green Gables has been adapted multiple times, and my mum or sisters were watching one of the adaptations, which had a segment that people were showing. It was like a skill or talent show and stuff, and Anne had decided to recite a written story, and she would narrate it as her talent. And this was things people enjoyed. People enjoyed listening to people narrate stories, and that wasn't that far in the past, okay? It's completely disappeared now because actually, when I say it's disappeared, it's evolved, actually, because now we have audiobooks. Pity this one isn't sponsored by Audible, because that would fit really well right now. Because audiobooks is actually that, but in an evolution and a more enjoyable point where we have professional narrators who can emote and convey the story to like such great levels to make the story really more enjoyable, where you get the story told to you, read to you. Well, guess what? That happened in the past as well, where people would actually do kind of dramatic performances of narration from stories. This goes into the bard and the troubadour thing as well. That's what they would do. People enjoyed it, and family members would do it too. Hey, could you share us that story, but in the way that a storyteller would, you know? In actual fact, a really, really great fantasy novel series that had the storytelling kind, where there was a local storyteller and they depicted it great, is Name of the Wind. I have a special custom leather bound right there, where the art of storytelling is a cultural thing that he wound up in the entire story just brilliantly. I think I need to find an Audible sponsor for this, because I've got a book recommendation that shows it. Dang it! But it's great because he actually wove a more traditional type of entertainment into several levels of the culture, where you come across people telling stories, both the local storyteller and traveling troubadours, and people who do it as almost a profession, people who share the stories in song or verse or poem and stuff. It added such an immersive element to this medieval kind of inspired setting. It's somewhat closer to Renaissance in some aspects. Great. But it comes from history. People love storytelling, and it was told in different ways. Sometimes they were yes, they could read stories, but also it was narrated, told in kind of like a storyteller fashion in a group. The extension and more elaborate manifestation of the enjoyment of sharing stories is, of course, in theatre. The practice of having people act out a dramatised performance, of course, dates back a very long time, and the practice continued all throughout the medieval period. It was common for churches to organise plays depicting religious events as a means to be able to teach gospel stories. They would also act out accounts of beloved saints and their favourite stories on top of this. The scale and practice of medieval theatre ranged from elaborate to humble, sometimes even just family members putting them on for other family members, town members gathering together to enjoy it, to practice professionals who do it as part of their trade. Plays would also get recorded, copied and shared so other people could act them out, depict them and put them on for performance to other people. And the scale of these plays could actually get quite large, some comprising as much as 72 actors for one performance. Plays were staged on pageant wagons, stages, within town clearings, and of course dedicated theatres. It was common for guilds to organise, stage and perform plays for their guild members, so the enjoyment of theatre productions both on the large and small scales was a very common thing all throughout the medieval period. Then, of course, there are games, multiple games that we have forgotten and lost through time. I think about children's games, how they play games, you know, hide and seek, tag, all these things. There would have been variants and similar types of games that children would have enjoyed. And my children just make up games sometimes really weird ones that don't make sense, but they just end up playing it, and it's hilarious, it's fun. And then they have traditional games, and that's what children do, and they still do it to this day. They just make up games without technology. That would have been a massive one. But guess what? Adults can enjoy certain games as well. We have historical examples, not from the medieval period. You can actually see some interesting examples from Regency period novels, like a lot of Jane Austen novels and everything like that, about the games adults would play when they have just a get-together, where they come over for dinner, and after dinner they'd sit down in their sitting room, and part of the sitting room is like, it's funny, what do you use as a sitting room in the modern day if it doesn't have a TV? Well, sometimes people just sat, talked, associated, right? But also, it would be for games. And we can kind of get some parallels even in the modern day, because there are games that adults play, like charades, like, what's the headband one where they have the thing on the head and you got to guess it? That's not charades, is it? Or charades? But these are clear examples that even adults like playing games for the fun of it, okay? And these are the type of games that adults would play, like when they're getting together, they want to pass the time, want to entertain themselves. They would also play games. As to medieval specific ones, unfortunately I don't have direct examples. Share them in the comments if you know any. By the way, if you know any other things that they did for entertainment that I'm not covering in this video, because I'm sure I'm going to miss some, please share in the comments below. I'd love to see them. But of course, people love games. You don't need technology just to entertain yourself. Then there are, of course, board games. Unfortunately, most of the medieval board games have been lost to time. There would have been numerous types, differing from time period and region. But we do have a great resource that comes from the 13th century, where the King of Castile, Alfonso X, commissioned the Book of Games, also known as the Book of Chess, Dice and Tables. And within it contained descriptions of several types of board games, including chess. In fact, it's the earliest European translation of chess. It also describes a dice game and a variant of backgammon. It has artistic depictions, and as the dice game would imply, it also shows the types of dice. And as we see, these are the classic cube-pipped dice. As I mentioned, there would have been other types of board games as well, and just think about all the different types of variant games we have now created in the modern day, and sometimes you don't need to think too hard to be able to create a game with dice like this, and that's what medieval people would have done as well. From noble to commoner, it's extremely easy to make dice like this. On the most basic level, all you need is wood and a knife and carving out cubes, and then marking each face. And I know for myself, I have spent hours upon hours just playing chess with a family member, so I can understand very clearly, depending on their taste, medieval people would have spent hours upon hours enjoying board games with family and friends. The other big thing, and this is where I feel like a lot of the personal entertainment that people would have used in the medieval period, and also examples, hobbies. But what's interesting about hobbies, it would kind of be associated into their daily life, sometimes as their homemaking things and other things, because there are things that you can enjoy that have great utility just generally. Knitting, okay? Like knitting literally makes clothing. If you get the thread, you can make clothing, but it's also a hobby people have enjoyed and challenging themselves to make more complex things, knitting, everything. And so when it comes to the hobbies that people can literally enjoy and then use to not only help themselves and make things, build things that they would use in their daily lives, but might be the basis of professions that they could pursue. Yeah, knitting, wood carving, crocheting, leatherwork, painting, writing, cooking, brewing, and the list goes on and on. Any type of hobby you can think of, people like hobbies. One of my hobbies that it still benefits me in my career, but I don't get to use as much as drawing. I love drawing in the specific way of depicting things that I have invented my own stories. I like making stories and expressing those stories in multiple ways. I've written a novel, that's the biggest one, but before I got into writing, I would draw them. Drawing is a great one. Of course, you need access to the ability to draw. So what would actually be more common than drawing in the medieval period? It would be painting, because you could paint on multiple surfaces. It could be wood, it could be walls, it could be any, it's a lot easier to paint than actually drawing per se. Drawing you could get paper, or you could do on bark and charcoal and stuff, but that's more kind of for writing, ink and other things. But painting actually is something that a lot more people were able to enjoy than you might think, because you can make paint out of natural minerals and people would learn this normally and get to enjoy the pastime of painting. And you can make brushes and everything. You just get fur off an animal or certain type of reeds and things, and you learn how to make an appropriate type of brush. And you ground down certain types of rocks and mix with water and other things. You can make your own paints, and a lot of people could enjoy painting. But all the other practical tasks that you end up doing in your daily life, people might find, I really enjoy doing that. Bit of wood carving, carpentry. I had to fix this beam or I had to fix my chair. I was like, but I kind of enjoy that. And then they and it leads onto a whole trade. So hobbies, I actually feel, would be a really large element of entertainment of the medieval period. And so, you know, they could have their own trade, whatever, and they're looking forward to their day off, and they're just going to do some of their hobby on their day off. It's something that they like, and any number of those things. The other thing that medieval people loved to do for entertainment were festivals. They actually had a lot more festivals, holidays, special holiday days where the community would come together and do fun things, cook up a lot of food where they could enjoy, sing, dance, larger scale games that involved more people. Playing sports is another one, because we kind of mentioned tennis, but there are other sports people enjoyed as well that required larger group activities. There are kind of medieval versions of handball, football, and other stuff that are a bit more violent. And I think there's an example of one that's still, I'm not sure, I think it comes from, can date back to the medieval period. I wish I actually looked this up because I didn't think of it in preparation to it, but it's a game that it's as simple as this. You need to be holding the ball by the end of the timer. When the timer goes out, whoever's holding the ball wins, but there's almost no other rules associated with it to get a hold of that ball, and just fighting and bashing happens. And it's all in this town, and they even, I think, still practice it to this day. And I believe from memory it has medieval roots. There's a lot of... Anyway, what I'm trying to say is there are examples of medieval ball games, the predecessors of football or soccer and things, that was a bit more violent than we allow in the modern day. But of course, people loved sports. Archery was a sport that heaps of people enjoyed in the medieval period. In England specifically, it became a cultural thing where both boys and men were encouraged to practice archery every Sunday. And archery is also a really interesting example where practicing a sport also doubles as a very practical skill, both for hunting and warfare. There are other sports that people enjoyed practicing that could also double as a practical skill, but also as a type of training. Wrestling, boxing, okay? And the more noble kind of pursuits like jousting and tournaments and stuff, that's one of the more noble entertainments. But a lot of the entertaining things that I've mentioned, even festivals and stuff, were absolutely enjoyed by the nobility as well. And then you have the examples of the more expensive hobbies that the nobility could enjoy. But I hope this gives you kind of a guideline and baseline of a number of examples of the types of entertainment people loved and enjoyed and indulged in the medieval period. It's not exhaustive. If you know any more that I didn't cover, I'd love to read in the comments below. And of course, I'd love to see you on the next video here on Shadiversity. So until that time, farewell.